I never thought it would come to this, crafting lies with the precision of an artist, each detail meticulously painted to conceal the truth beneath. But here I was, staring at the flight confirmation on my phone, knowing full well that my husband Ethan's name wasn't on it. Because I'd cancelled his ticket. The idea had started as a whisper in the back of my mind, easy to ignore at first. But like most bad decisions, it grew louder, drowning out the voice of reason until it felt like the only choice that made sense. This was supposed to be our family trip. A chance to reconnect, to put the pieces back together after months of growing distance. But I didn't want that. Not really. What I wanted, what I craved, was the freedom to be someone else, even if just for a little while. And for that, Ethan couldn't come. Did you check the passports? Ethan asked, his brow furrowed in that way that always made me roll my eyes. Yes, I replied, forcing a smile. 3 times. We're all set. He nodded, clearly still in work mode, his mind juggling a dozen things even as he packed his suitcase. That was Ethan, always responsible, always the planner. The man I had fallen in love with because he made me feel safe. But safety isn't the same as excitement. While he worried about flight itineraries and hotel reservations, I was thinking about him. The man who wasn't my husband. The man whose name I kept hidden behind innocent contacts on my phone. I told myself it wasn't serious. Just a distraction. A little thrill to remind me I was still desirable, still alive. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was an escape. The morning of our flight felt surreal. The kids were buzzing with excitement, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that only I could feel. Ethan was his usual composed self, double-checking everything, completely unaware that his name had been quietly erased from the passenger list days ago. We arrived at the airport, the chaos of travelers the perfect cover for the storm brewing beneath the surface. I could feel my heart pounding as we approached the check-in counter. The airline agent smiled politely, typing away at her keyboard. Then her expression shifted slightly, that polite smile faltering just enough to make Ethan lean forward. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but it looks like your ticket has been cancelled." I held my breath, pretending to be as surprised as he was. "That's impossible," Ethan said, his voice calm but edged with frustration. "I booked all of our tickets together." The agent checked again, shaking her head. "It was cancelled 2 days ago." I watched him scroll through his phone, confusion etched on his face. Then, right on cue, I pulled out my phone and sent the message I had drafted the night before. "You should be taking care of the kids. Your brother will take your place." Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing deeper. I braced myself for the confrontation, but it never came. Instead, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck like he was trying to process the situation without losing his temper in front of the kids. And just like that, it worked. He stayed behind. And I left, boarding a plane that was supposed to be our family vacation. Without him, the minute the plane took off, I felt a rush of relief mixed with something darker. Guilt? Maybe. But it was buried under layers of adrenaline and anticipation. I sent Ethan a quick, casual text from the plane, pretending to be concerned about the mix-up, maintaining the illusion that this was all some unfortunate mistake. But it wasn't. It was exactly what I had planned. Because my real trip wasn't about sightseeing with the kids. It was about him. The man who made me feel alive in a way Ethan hadn't in years. We met in Milan, not Paris. A hidden rendezvous tucked away from the life I was supposed to be living. For a few days, I was someone else than carefree, desired, untethered from the responsibilities and routines that had become my prison. I thought I was in control. But control is an illusion. When I got back home, reality hit harder than I expected. Ethan was waiting. His face was unreadable, his eyes cold in a way I'd never seen before. There was no hug, no welcome home. Just silence. And then, without a word, he held up his phone. A photo. Me. In Milan. With him. The blood drained from my face. My carefully constructed lies crumbled in an instant. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any words could have been. And that's when I realized? This wasn't the end of my affair. It was the beginning of my downfall. The photo Ethan held up was like a blade, sharp, cold, and merciless. It wasn't just any photo. It was the photo. Me. In Milan. Laughing. With him. The background unmistakable, the skyline glowing, the intimacy undeniable. I stood frozen in the doorway, my suitcase still in hand, the weight of my lies finally crashing down like a wave I couldn't outrun. My heart raced, but it wasn't from guilt. It was fear. Fear of losing control, fear of the consequences I had convinced myself would never come. Ethan didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything: betrayal, disappointment, and something else, something darker. I opened my mouth, searching for words, but nothing came out. What was there to say? That it wasn't what it looked like? That it was a mistake? But it was exactly what it looked like. And it wasn't a mistake. Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice low and steady. So, how was Paris? The sarcasm dripped from his words, cutting deeper than if he'd yelled. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Ethan, Don't, he snapped, his calm facade cracking for the first time. Don't lie to me. Not now. I stood there, my mind racing for something, anything, to say that would make this go away. But the truth was undeniable, etched in pixels on his phone. He tossed the phone onto the coffee table and crossed his arms, waiting. I took a deep breath. It was a mistake. His laugh was hollow, humorless. A mistake? You canceled my flight. You planned this. Don't insult me. I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I was unhappy, I whispered, my voice barely audible. His jaw clenched. So, you decided to burn everything to the ground? I wanted to defend myself, to explain, but the words felt empty even before they left my mouth. What could I possibly say to make this better? Nothing. Because it wasn't just one mistake. It was a series of choices. Choices I made. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He didn't cry. He just walked away. Left me standing there in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of my own making. I sank onto the couch, staring at nothing, my mind replaying every moment that had led to this. The texts, the meetings, the lies. I thought I was in control. I thought I could have it all, a family, a husband, and an escape. But control is an illusion. And mine had just shattered. Ethan barely spoke to me. We moved through the house like strangers, exchanging only the necessary words about the kids, meals, schedules. I tried to reach out, to apologize, but every attempt was met with silence or a cold, detached nod. I didn't know which was worse, his anger or his indifference. At least anger meant he still felt something. Indifference meant I was already gone. I found myself staring at my phone, tempted to text him, the man who had been my escape. But what would that solve? He wasn't the answer. He never was. I thought about the thrill, the excitement, the way he made me feel alive. But none of that mattered now. Because all I felt was empty. One night, after the kids were asleep, Ethan finally spoke. Why? Just one word, but it carried the weight of everything. I didn't have an answer. Not one that would make sense. Not one that would undo the damage. I don't know, I whispered. His eyes flashed with something, rage, maybe, or heartbreak. That's not good enough. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg for forgiveness. But I didn't. Because I knew I didn't deserve it. He stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the echo of my own choices. Lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I didn't ruin my marriage the day I canceled Ethan's flight. I ruined it the day I stopped fighting for it. The day I chose excitement over stability. The day I chose him over the man who had given me everything. And now, I was left with nothing. Except regret. Ethan's footsteps faded down the hallway, the door to the guest room clicking shut behind him. That soft, final sound echoed louder than any argument could have. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my chest hollow, a vacuum where my heart used to be. I thought I'd feel something more: rage, despair, maybe even relief, but all I felt was nothing. Nothing but the crushing weight of my own choices. Days passed in a blur of awkward silences and careful avoidance. We lived in the same house, but it wasn't a home anymore. We were like strangers trapped in a shared space, orbiting around each other without ever making contact. The kids noticed, of course. "Why isn't Daddy eating with us?" my daughter asked one evening, her innocent eyes scanning the empty chair at the dinner table. I forced a smile, my heart breaking in ways I couldn't show. "Daddy's just busy with work, sweetheart." A lie. Another one to add to the pile. But what was I supposed to say? Mommy broke Daddy's heart, and now he can't stand to be around her? So, I smiled. I lied. And the guilt grew heavier. Late at night, when the house was silent and the only sound was my own shallow breathing, I found myself staring at my phone. My fingers hovered over his contact, the man who had been my escape, my distraction, the one who made me feel alive when everything else felt stagnant. I wanted to reach out, to feel that rush again, that validation I'd craved for so long. But I didn't. Because the thrill had died the moment Ethan looked at me like I was a stranger. I realized then that he was never the answer. He was just the symptom of the problem I refused to face, my own emptiness. It happened on a Tuesday. Just an ordinary day. I was folding laundry when Ethan walked in, his face unreadable. He stood there for a moment, as if deciding whether to say something or walk away like he always did. But this time, he didn't walk away. "I want a divorce," he said simply, like he was ordering coffee, his voice calm, detached. I froze, the pile of clothes slipping from my hands. "What?" My voice was barely a whisper. "I can't do this anymore," he continued, his eyes hollow. "I thought I could. For the kids. For us. But I can't." I stared at him, my mind racing, searching for something to say, something to fix this. But there was nothing. Because I'd already broken it. "I'll move out in a few weeks," he added, turning to leave. That was it. No yelling. No dramatic confrontation. Just over. After he left the room, I collapsed onto the floor, the weight of it all finally crashing down. The realization hit me like a freight train. I had lost him. For good. I thought I'd be okay without him. I thought I didn't need him. But now, faced with the emptiness, I realized how wrong I was. I didn't just lose my husband. I lost the man who loved me despite my flaws, who stood by me even when I didn't deserve it. And I threw it all away. For what? A fleeting thrill? A temporary distraction? I buried my face in my hands and sobbed, the kind of sobs that come from a place so deep it feels like you'll never stop. Because I knew the truth. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of me. I stopped going through the motions after that. I didn't care about the laundry, the dishes, the PTA meetings. None of it mattered. I was drowning in my own guilt, suffocating under the weight of what I'd done. Ethan avoided me, and I couldn't blame him. The kids were the only thing tethering me to reality, but even they couldn't fill the void. I tried to reach out to him again, the man who started all of this. But he didn't respond. Of course he didn't. Because he didn't care. I was just a game to him. A temporary distraction. Just like he was to me. But the difference? I lost everything. Weeks later, after the papers were filed and Ethan officially moved out, I found myself standing in the middle of our empty bedroom. The bed we once shared was gone, leaving nothing but an outline on the carpet where it used to be. And that's when it hit me. I thought Ethan was the one who left. But the truth was, I left first. Long before the affair, long before the lies, I'd checked out. I just never realized it until it was too late. I stared at the empty space, tears streaming down my face, and whispered to no one. I'm sorry. But no one was there to hear it. Because the only person who needed to hear it was gone. The day Ethan officially moved out felt like a funeral without a casket. There was no ceremony, no final words of goodbye, just the hollow sound of his footsteps fading down the hall, the front door closing with a soft click, and the deafening silence that followed. I stood in the middle of the empty bedroom, staring at the bare walls, the outlines of furniture etched like ghosts of a life I'd destroyed. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's story unfold, except it was mine. And I was the villain. The house didn't feel like home anymore. Every corner was a reminder of what I'd lost, the family dinners we no longer had, the Sunday mornings spent wrapped in blankets, the quiet moments filled with the kind of comfort you only realize you miss once it's gone. The kids adapted faster than I did. Children are resilient like that. They asked about their dad, of course, but I kept my answers simple. Daddy's living somewhere else now, but he loves you very much. A half-truth. Because I knew Ethan's love for them was unwavering. It was me he couldn't stand to be around. At night, the loneliness hit hardest. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. I thought about reaching out to him, the man who had started this mess with me. But every time I picked up my phone, I hesitated. What was I going to say? Hey, I ruined my marriage. You still up? Pathetic. Besides, I knew deep down he didn't care. I was a distraction for him, a secret thrill, nothing more. The moment things got real, he disappeared, leaving me alone in the wreckage I'd created. I deserved it. Weeks after Ethan left, my phone buzzed late at night. My heart raced when I saw his name on the screen. For a second, hope flickered, a fragile, foolish thing. Maybe he wanted to talk. Maybe he missed me. I answered quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. Hello? But it wasn't Ethan's voice I heard. It was his lawyer. Cold. Professional. We're finalizing the divorce papers. Ethan wants to proceed without mediation. No room for discussion. No second chances. Just business. I hung up, my hands trembling, the finality of it sinking in like a stone in water. This was it. No more what-ifs. No more pretending. It was over. I didn't cry right away. I sat on the kitchen floor, staring at nothing, numb. The realization came in waves, each one heavier than the last. I thought I'd feel anger, at Ethan, at him, at anyone but myself. But there was no one left to blame. Just me. The tears came eventually, violent and uncontrollable. I sobbed until my chest hurt, until my throat was raw, until there was nothing left but exhaustion and regret. I'd traded stability for excitement. Security for temporary thrills. Love for lust. And this was the cost. The next day, I did something I hadn't done since Ethan left. I went to see him. I didn't have a plan, didn't rehearse what I'd say. I just drove to his new apartment, my heart pounding with every mile. When he opened the door, the look on his face said it all, surprise, annoyance, maybe even a flicker of pity. What are you doing here? His voice was cold, distant. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. I needed to see you. He didn't invite me in. He didn't soften. He just stood there, waiting. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words feeling inadequate the moment they left my mouth. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think that changes anything? I shook my head, tears welling up. No. I don't know. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples like he was too tired to deal with me. You should go. I wanted to argue, to beg, to say something that would undo everything. But there was nothing left to say. So, I turned and walked away, the sound of the door closing behind me like the final nail in the coffin. I realized something on the drive home. I wasn't there to win him back. I was there because I couldn't accept that I'd lost him. But loss isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, a door closing softly, a name deleted from your phone, a silence that stretches longer with each passing day. I went home to an empty house, sat on the floor, and accepted it. This was my life now. Not a punishment. Just the consequence of my own choices. People say time heals all wounds. But they never mention that some wounds leave scars you can't hide. And every day, I look in the mirror and see mine. A reminder of what I had. And what I'll never have again. They say time dulls pain, but I've learned that's not entirely true. Time doesn't heal all wounds, it just teaches you how to carry them differently. Some days, the weight feels lighter, manageable even. Other days, like today, it crushes you under its full force, reminding you that scars may fade, but they never truly disappear. It had been weeks since I stood outside Ethan's apartment, my pathetic apology hanging in the stale air between us. He hadn't reached out since, and I'd stopped expecting him to. But hope is a stubborn thing. Even when it has no reason to exist, it lingers like an unwelcome guest, whispering what-ifs when you least expect it. The envelope was thick, cold, clinical, filled with legal jargon that reduced our life together to bullet points and signatures. Property division. Custody arrangement. Irreconcilable differences. It felt surreal. How could a decade of love, laughter, and shared memories be reduced to a few sheets of paper? My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. It wasn't the legal terms that broke me. It was the signature at the bottom, Ethan's name, written in the same handwriting I'd once found comforting, now etched with finality. There was a blank space next to it. Waiting for mine. I stared at it for hours, pen in hand, unable to move. Signing meant accepting that this was real. That there was no going back. No fixing what I'd broken. I tried to distract myself the next day, cleaning the house, rearranging furniture, scrolling mindlessly through social media. But nothing worked. The silence was deafening, and the emptiness was suffocating. In a moment of weakness, I picked up my phone and scrolled to his name, the man I'd risked everything for. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. But I didn't call. Because deep down, I knew he wasn't the answer. He never was. He was just the match I struck to feel a spark, not realizing it would burn everything to the ground. A week later, I ran into Ethan at the grocery store. It felt like fate's cruel joke. Of all the places, at all the times, there he was, standing by the produce section, comparing apples with the same meticulous focus he applied to everything in life. I froze. My heart raced, my palms sweaty. For a brief second, he looked up. Our eyes met. No warmth. No hate. Just nothing. He nodded politely, like I was just another stranger passing by. And maybe I was. I forced a smile, my throat tight, and quickly walked away, leaving my cart half full in the middle of the aisle. When I got to my car, I broke down, sobbing into the steering wheel, the reality of it all crashing down again. He had moved on. Not with someone new, at least, I didn't know if he had. But emotionally, mentally, he was gone. And I was still here, stuck in the past, drowning in the consequences of my own decisions. The hardest part wasn't losing Ethan. It was facing the kids. Why doesn't Daddy live with us anymore? My son asked one night, his small voice filled with confusion and hurt. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile. Sometimes, grown-ups decide they're better living in different homes. But we both love you very much. Another lie. Not the part about loving them, that was true. But the part where I made it sound like it was a mutual decision, like Ethan had just decided to leave. The truth was, I pushed him away. With every lie. Every betrayal. Every selfish decision. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to confess, to unburden myself. But they didn't deserve that weight. So, I carried it alone. It took me another week to finally sign the divorce papers. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Ethan and I had once planned vacations, discussed careers, argued over trivial things like who forgot to take out the trash. Now, that table was just a surface holding the remnants of a life I destroyed. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling. I thought I'd feel something, relief, regret, closure. But all I felt was numb. With one signature, it was done. Our marriage was officially over. I stared at the paper, waiting for the world to shift, for something to change. But nothing did. Because the real change had happened long before the ink dried. It happened the moment I stopped valuing what I had. Weeks later, we met one last time to finalize custody arrangements. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no tears. Just signatures. Ethan was polite, distant. When it was over, I stood there, holding the finalized documents, unsure of what to do next. I looked at him, my heart aching. Do you ever think about what we had? He paused, his expression softening slightly. Sometimes, he admitted. But then I remember what you did. His words weren't cruel. Just honest. And that honesty hurt more than any insult ever could. I nodded, blinking back tears. I'm sorry. He didn't respond. He just left. And this time, I knew it was for good. I go through the motions now, work, kids, life. But there's an emptiness that never fully goes away. A scar where love used to be. Not because Ethan left. But because I made him. I thought the worst part of losing him would be the loneliness. But it's not. The worst part is knowing I had it all. And I gave it away. After signing the divorce papers, I thought there would be some kind of release. Maybe not peace, but at least a sense of finality. I expected the weight to shift, to feel something different, a new chapter, perhaps. But instead, the emptiness stayed. It wasn't the sharp, unbearable pain of the early days after Ethan left. No, this was different. This was a dull ache, the kind that lingers in the background of everything, like white noise you can't turn off. A constant reminder of what I'd lost. The house was too quiet without him. It's strange how you never realize how much space someone fills until they're gone. Not just physically, but emotionally. His presence had been woven into every room, every routine, every mundane part of our lives. Now, it was just me. The mornings were the hardest. Waking up to an empty bed, no sound of coffee brewing, no faint rustle of pages as he skimmed the news. Just silence. The kind that seeps into your skin and settles in your bones. I tried to pretend I was okay. I forced myself back into routines, work, errands, PTA meetings. I smiled when people asked how I was doing, gave the usual responses. I'm fine. Taking it one day at a time. Just focusing on the kids. All lies. Because underneath it all, I was drowning. I thought about texting him, the man I'd risked everything for. Maybe he'd respond this time. Maybe he'd fill the void, even if just for a moment. But I didn't. Because I knew now that he was never the answer. He was just the distraction that cost me everything. The kids were the only part of my life that still felt real. Their laughter, their chaos, it was the only thing that kept me grounded. But even that was different now. They were adjusting to the new normal, weekends with Ethan, holidays split down the middle, questions left unanswered. Why can't Daddy live here anymore? My daughter asked one night, her small voice cutting through the silence. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile. Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I said softly. She nodded, accepting it without pressing further. But her eyes lingered, filled with questions I couldn't answer. Or maybe I just didn't want to. It happened on a random Tuesday. No special date, no triggering event. I was folding laundry, Ethan's old t-shirt accidentally mixed in with the kids' clothes. I picked it up, the fabric soft and familiar, and that's when it hit me. The finality of it all. The life I'd thrown away. The family I'd broken. I sank to the floor, clutching the shirt, and sobbed. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd grown used to, but the kind that shakes your whole body, the kind that leaves you gasping for air. Because in that moment, I realized something I'd been avoiding for months. Ethan wasn't the one who left. I did. Long before the affair, long before the lies, I'd checked out. Emotionally. Mentally. And by the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. A few days later, in a moment of weakness, I texted him. I miss you. No response. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever. And that's when it finally clicked. He never cared. Not really. I was just a convenience, an escape. The same way I had used him. And now, with nothing left to distract me, I had to face the one person I'd been running from all along. Myself. I stood in front of the mirror that night, really looking at myself for the first time in months. The woman staring back wasn't someone I recognized. She looked older. Tired. Broken. But beneath the exhaustion, beneath the regret, there was something else, something raw and undeniable. Truth. I had been so busy blaming Ethan for our problems, for the distance, for the routine that felt suffocating. But the truth was, it was never about him. It was about me. My own insecurities. My own selfishness. My own need to feel wanted, even if it meant destroying the one person who had loved me unconditionally. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I wrote Ethan a letter. Not to win him back. Not to undo what I'd done. But to tell the truth, for the first time. I poured out everything, my regrets, my mistakes, the lies I told myself and him. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't expect anything. I just wrote. When I finished, I sat there staring at the envelope, debating whether to send it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about him. It was about me. About finally facing the reality of what I'd done, without excuses or justifications. I mailed it the next day. Weeks passed. No response. And that was okay. Because for the first time, I wasn't looking for one. The silence didn't hurt the way it used to. It was just silence. Not a punishment. Not a consequence. Just the absence of something that was never meant to stay. Thought the worst part of losing Ethan would be the loneliness. But it wasn't. The worst part was realizing I had everything I ever wanted. And I let it slip through my fingers. Not because it wasn't enough. But because I didn't know how to appreciate it when I had it. Time didn't heal anything. It just gave me space to sit with the damage I'd caused, like staring at the wreckage after an explosion, knowing I was the one who lit the match. Ethan was gone. He wasn't coming back. And now, every morning felt like waking up in a house haunted by the life I used to have. Not because it was physically empty. But because mornings were the worst. The alarm would buzz, but there was no reason to rush out of bed. No Ethan brewing coffee, no sleepy greetings in the hallway, no comforting warmth on the other side of the mattress. Just cold sheets and a colder reality. The kids were the only reason I got up at all. Their sleepy faces, their messy hair, their innocent questions, proof that life was still moving forward even though mine felt frozen in place. But they didn't know the full story. Why doesn't Daddy come over anymore? Is he mad at you? Did you make him sad? I never had the right answers. So I gave them the softest versions of the truth. Sometimes adults just don't get along. Daddy and I both love you very much. Half-truths wrapped in lies. Because the real answer? Yes, I made him sad. Yes, I broke us. Yes, this is all my fault. I wasn't expecting to see Ethan. I was at the park with the kids, pushing my daughter on the swing when I saw him, across the playground, standing with someone else. A woman. She was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm in that casual, intimate way that felt like a slap. I froze. My chest tightened, a knot of jealousy and regret coiling deep inside me. Not because he had moved on, but because I hadn't. I watched them for a few minutes, unnoticed, the kids' laughter blurring into the background. He looked happy. Genuinely happy. And that's when it hit me, he was happier without me. The realization felt like a punch. I had convinced myself that maybe, someday, we'd find our way back to each other. But seeing him like that, carefree and content, shattered whatever delusions I had left. He was gone. Not just physically. Gone. I went home that night and did something I hadn't done in a long time. I let the emptiness swallow me whole. I poured a glass of wine. Then another. And another. Hoping it would drown out the ache. But it didn't. Nothing could. So, I picked up my phone and texted him. The man who had been the beginning of the end. I miss you. No response. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. And that silence? It was louder than any argument Ethan and I had ever had. Because it confirmed what I'd been avoiding all along. I was just a game to him. And now, I was left with nothing. I wrote Ethan another letter. Not because I thought it would change anything, but because I needed to get the words out. I poured my heart onto the page, every regret, every mistake, every apology I couldn't say out loud. I told him I was sorry. That I missed him. That I'd give anything to go back and undo what I'd done. But when I finished, I didn't send it. Because it wasn't for him. It was for me. To acknowledge the truth I'd been running from. I had destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. And no letter, no apology, no words would ever fix that. The first weekend the kids stayed with Ethan was unbearable. The house felt even emptier than before. I wandered from room to room, the silence deafening, the absence of their laughter like an echo of everything I'd lost. I sat in their empty rooms, staring at their toys, their drawings, the tiny shoes lined up by the door. I realized then that I hadn't just lost Ethan. I'd lost us, the family we used to be. And for what? A fleeting thrill? A temporary distraction? A man who didn't even care enough to respond to my texts? I thought I was chasing freedom. But all I found was loneliness. Late that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her eyes were hollow, her face tired, her expression empty. And for the first time, I said it out loud. This is your fault. The words were harsh, but they were true. No more excuses. No more blaming Ethan. No more pretending. I had done this. And now, I had to live with it. A few weeks later, Ethan called. My heart raced when I saw his name on the screen. I answered quickly, my voice shaky. Hello? His tone was calm. Detached. I just wanted to let you know I'm getting remarried. Silence. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Remarried. He had really moved on. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. Congratulations, I whispered. We exchanged a few more polite words, but I don't remember any of them. All I remember is the sound of the call ending. And the finality of it. I sat on the floor, staring at the phone, the reality sinking in. There was no going back. No second chances. No redemption arc. Just the life I'd built. And the life I'd destroyed. I thought the worst part of losing Ethan would be the loneliness. But it's not. The worst part is knowing I had everything I ever wanted. And I threw it away. For nothing, after Ethan's call, everything felt different. Not because I didn't already know he was gone, but because hearing the words, "I'm getting remarried," made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of hope. I sat on the floor long after the call ended, the silence around me louder than ever. I thought about all the times I'd fantasized about fixing things, about him waking up one day and realizing he still loved me. But that fantasy shattered with one phone call. And all that was left was reality. A reality I created. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind replayed every moment of our relationship, the good, the bad, and the parts I'd tried to forget. Our first date. The day he proposed. The birth of our children. All the memories blurred together, tainted by the choices I made. I got up around 3 a.m., pacing the house like a ghost. Every room felt like a museum of a life I didn't belong to anymore. The photos on the walls, the toys scattered in the living room, the faint scent of his old cologne still lingering in the closet, it all mocked me. This was the life I destroyed. And now it belonged to someone else. It wasn't long before I met her, the woman who was going to marry my ex-husband. It happened at one of the kids' school events. I wasn't prepared. I thought Ethan would come alone. But there she was, standing beside him, smiling like she belonged there. Like she had always belonged there. She was beautiful in an effortless way, confident, graceful, the kind of woman who didn't have to try too hard. And Ethan looked at her the way he used to look at me. Like she was his world. I stood there, frozen, my heart racing, pretending to be okay while every part of me screamed inside. When our eyes met, she smiled politely, like I was just another parent at the event. But I wasn't. I was the woman who used to be her. After the event, Ethan and I exchanged a few words about the kids, polite, distant, like acquaintances discussing the weather. But then I said something I hadn't planned. "She seems nice," I blurted out, my voice tighter than I intended. Ethan glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "She is." Just 2 words. But they hit harder than any argument we'd ever had. Because he didn't owe me anything anymore. Not explanations. Not reassurances. Nothing. I forced a smile, nodded, and walked away, my chest burning with a mix of jealousy and regret. That night, I broke again. I stared at my phone, tempted to text him, the man who'd been the catalyst for all of this. But what would that change? Nothing. He was part of the problem, not the solution. So instead, I sat in the dark, drinking too much wine, scrolling through old photos, of Ethan, of our family, of a life that felt like someone else's now. I cried until there was nothing left. No tears. No fight. Just emptiness. I thought I was hiding it well. The sadness, the regret, the slow unraveling of who I used to be. But kids are smarter than we give them credit for. One night, my daughter crawled into my bed, her little face filled with concern. "Mommy, are you sad?" she whispered. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart. Just tired." She nodded, snuggling closer. But her words stuck with me long after she fell asleep. Because I was sad. And tired. Not just physically, but emotionally, exhausted from carrying the weight of my own mistakes. I tried dating after that. Not because I was ready, but because I thought it would help. It didn't. Every conversation felt forced. Every smile felt fake. No one compared to Ethan, and I hated myself for that. Because I didn't deserve to miss him. Not after what I did. But I did. I missed everything. The way he laughed at his own terrible jokes, the way he'd absent-mindedly hold my hand while driving, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I missed the version of me who still had him. It wasn't until months later that I realized the truth. I didn't miss Ethan because he was gone. I missed who I was when I was with him. I missed feeling loved, needed, important. And that's what hurt the most. Because I'd spent so long trying to find that feeling somewhere else, through an affair, through temporary thrills, when the real problem was inside me all along. I was broken. And instead of fixing myself, I broke everything else. I stood in front of the mirror one night, staring at my reflection. For the first time, I didn't see the victim of my own choices. I saw the culprit. The woman who had everything and let it slip through her fingers. Not because it wasn't enough, but because I didn't know how to hold on to it. I whispered to myself, "You did this." And for the first time, I believed it. I wrote Ethan another message. "I'm happy for you. Truly. I hope she gives you everything I couldn't." But I never sent it. Because it wasn't for him. It was for me. A way to finally let go of the hope, the guilt, the what-ifs. A way to face the truth I'd been avoiding all along. I destroyed us. And now, I had to live with that. I thought the worst part of losing Ethan would be watching him move on. But it's not. The worst part is knowing he's happier without me. And realizing he always deserved to be. Time isn't a healer. That's a lie people tell to comfort themselves, to make it seem like wounds don't leave scars. But I've learned that time doesn't heal anything, it just teaches you how to carry the pain differently. It had been almost a year since Ethan left, and somehow, the ache was still there. Not sharp anymore, not the searing pain that made it hard to breathe. No, this was different. It was dull, constant, a quiet ache that never fully disappeared. I'd come to accept it as part of me now. Like a shadow that followed me everywhere, I was dropping the kids off at Ethan's when it happened. The house looked warm, inviting, the lights glowing softly in the early evening. The kids ran ahead, their excitement tangible. I stayed by the car, pretending to check my phone, trying not to look. But I did. Through the front window, I saw them, Ethan and her. She was helping him with dinner, laughing at something he said. And he looked happy. Genuinely happy. Not the forced, polite smile he gave me when we exchanged the kids. This was different. Real. Effortless. It hit me like a punch to the chest. Not because he was with someone else. But because he'd found the happiness I'd taken for granted. The happiness I'd destroyed. I cried the entire way home. Not the loud, dramatic sobs from those early days. This was quieter. Just tears streaming down my face, the kind you don't even bother wiping away because what's the point? I parked in the driveway, staring at the house that used to be a home. It felt like a stranger's house now, just walls and a roof filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. I sat there for a long time, thinking about everything. The affair. The lies. The choices I made. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt acceptance. I thought about reaching out to Ethan one last time. Maybe to apologize again, maybe to get some kind of closure. But what would that achieve? Nothing. Closure isn't something you get from other people. It's something you find within yourself. So, I didn't call. I didn't text. Instead, I wrote in my journal, the one I'd kept hidden, filled with pages of regret, guilt, and memories. I wrote down everything I wished I'd said to him. I'm sorry for not appreciating you when I had you. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is, you were more than enough, I just didn't know how to see it. I'm sorry for hurting you, for breaking the family we built, for taking you for granted. I hope you're happy. I hope she makes you feel loved in all the ways I didn't. You deserve that. You always did. I closed the journal, tears blurring the words. But I felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because I'd finally stopped running from it. One night, while tucking my daughter into bed, she looked at me with those big, curious eyes and asked, "Mom, do you still love Daddy?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I took a deep breath, brushing her hair back gently. I'll always care about Daddy. He's your dad, and he's very special. She nodded thoughtfully. But do you miss him? I smiled softly, my chest tightening. Sometimes. But sometimes missing someone just means you're remembering the good times. She seemed satisfied with that answer, drifting off to sleep shortly after. But I stayed there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I'd said. I didn't just miss the good times. I missed him. And I missed me, the person I was when I was with him. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No big realization. It was just a regular day, grocery shopping, cleaning, picking up the kids from school. I was folding laundry when I found one of Ethan's old t-shirts, buried at the bottom of the drawer. I held it for a moment, the fabric soft and familiar, memories flooding back. But this time, I didn't cry. I didn't feel that sharp sting of regret. I felt grateful. Grateful that I got to love him. Grateful for the life we had, even if I ruined it. Because even though I destroyed our marriage, it was real. And for a while, it was beautiful. I folded the shirt neatly and placed it in a donation box. Not because I wanted to forget. But because I was ready to let go. I stood in front of the mirror that night, staring at my reflection. I didn't see the broken, regretful woman anymore. I saw someone who had made mistakes, big ones, but who had learned from them. Someone who had lost everything, but was still standing. Someone who was finally ready to move forward. Not to find someone new. Not to fill the void. But to live with the lessons I'd learned. I wrote one last message to Ethan. Thank you for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself. I'll carry that with me always. But I didn't send it. Because it wasn't for him. It was for me. A final goodbye to the life I had, the mistakes I made, and the woman I used to be. I thought the worst part of losing Ethan would be the regret. But it's not. The worst part is realizing I had everything I ever wanted. And I didn't realize it until it was gone. Strange how life keeps moving even when you feel stuck. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and before you realize it, a year has passed. The pain doesn't disappear, it just changes. It softens around the edges, becoming part of you like a scar that fades but never really goes away. Ethan is remarried now. The kids talk about her like she's been there all along, seamlessly woven into their lives in a way that stings more than I'd like to admit. She's kind, I can tell. They adore her. And as much as it hurts, I can't hate her for that. Because she's giving them something I lost the right to provide, a happy family. It was my son's birthday, the first one we celebrated separately. Ethan threw a party at his house, inviting friends, family, even neighbors. I was invited, of course, for the kids. I stood in the corner, watching as she helped Ethan set up decorations, laughing with him the way I used to. Their ease with each other was undeniable, effortless. It wasn't forced. It wasn't a rebound. It was real. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt acceptance. Not because I was okay with it. But because fighting it wouldn't change anything. After the party, I went home alone, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I poured a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the blank wall in front of me. That's when it hit me, I'd spent so much time apologizing to Ethan, to the kids, to everyone but the one person I'd hurt the most. Me. I'd been punishing myself for so long, drowning in guilt and regret, thinking I deserved to feel miserable forever. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to forgive myself. Not because I didn't make mistakes. But because holding on to the guilt wouldn't change the past. I wrote one last letter, not to Ethan this time, but to myself. You made mistakes. You hurt people. You destroyed a life you thought was unbreakable. But you're still here. You survived it. You've carried the weight of your choices long enough. It's time to put it down. You'll never be the same person you were before, and that's okay. You're not meant to be. Learn from it. Grow from it. And maybe one day, you'll find peace. I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal, not to be sent or shared, just to exist. a private acknowledgement of everything I'd been through. Months later, Ethan called. Not about the kids, not about logistics, just to talk. We spoke for nearly an hour, catching up like old friends. There was no bitterness in his voice, no tension in mine. Just conversation. At one point, there was a pause. "I got your letter," he said softly. My heart skipped. I'd almost forgotten about it, the one I'd written but never sent. "I found it in the kid's backpack," he added, chuckling softly. "I don't know if it was meant for me, but I'm glad I read it." I didn't know what to say. So I just whispered, "Thank you." Not for reading it, but for calling. For showing me that maybe forgiveness isn't always about being forgiven. Sometimes, it's about knowing you've done everything you can. It wasn't a grand moment. No dramatic realization, no sudden burst of clarity. It was just a regular Tuesday. I woke up, made coffee, looked out the window, and felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've faced the worst parts of yourself and survived. The kind that comes from accepting that life doesn't always give you second chances, but it does give you the chance to be better. And maybe that's enough. I thought the worst part of losing Ethan would be the regret. But it's not. The worst part was believing I didn't deserve to move on. But I do. Not because I've earned it. But because life isn't about what you deserve. It's about what you do with the lessons you've learned. And I'm still learning. Still growing. Still here. The end.